Anyway, adding it all up, we're in a period of tremendous flux and uncertainty in the markets because of the scope of the crisis we've experienced here. We are still in the midst of writing off several $100 billion of bad debt. This process will take several more months. We've now guaranteed that no major financial institutions will fail, but they will still have to absorb for at least 9 or 12 more months frivolous losses on these bad securities, frivolous losses on these loans that were made during the heyday of the U.S. real estate boom 2 or 3 years ago. And the scope of the crisis has been so great, we now have not just a U.S. recession, but a G7 recession, encompassing all the old industrial countries. And this, in turn, will have a dampening effect on the emerging market countries, probably cutting their growth rates in half in the year ahead. But every crisis is an opportunity. The share prices of many attractive companies with good assets and good earnings prospects have fallen very, very sharply. And I think if one does the right research here in the next few months, looks at companies very carefully, they will certainly find very attractive opportunities, not just in mining, but in financial services, in real estate, and in other sectors which have been very, very severely penalized by the market correction we've experienced here in the last 2 or 3 months. Thank you very much. We can take a few questions, yes. Yes, right here.
David, thank you so much for that, by the way. That was awesome. China is today what America was, I think, in the 1930s. We went through the Industrial Revolution, the urbanization revolution that they're going through now. The U.S. lost 50% of its gross domestic product. We see today on Bloomberg, ships are being mothballed, factories are being shut in China. Why can't China experience the same thing we did?
Well, China has 3 growth locomotives. One is exports, which have been booming for the last 5 years, growth rates of 30%. That's going to slow down now quite dramatically. The growth rate of Chinese exports next year might be only 5%. They will suffer from the U.S. and European downturn, but their goods are still very competitive. So many people, when they go out to shop in an environment like this, shop down. If you look at the retail data in America this week, I said Neiman Marcus is off 28, JCPenney's down 13, Walmart's up 3. 60% of what Walmart sells comes from China. So the Walmart means China's exports are still holding up. Second growth locomotive is capital spending. Chinese capital spending has been enjoying growth rates in recent years of 25 and 30%. It would have been slowing, I think, next year to 10 or 15% because of this downturn. But this massive infrastructure program announced a few days ago will keep it at 20%. Third is domestic consumption. Rising wages mean rising living standards, rising demand for goods and services. Chinese wage growth has been averaging in the last few years 15, 16% because of a buoyant economy. That may next year slow down. And that could then dampen consumption sometime next year. But so far, consumption has held up pretty well. China also has the world's highest savings rate, almost 50%. So Chinese consumers don't have problems like they do here with debt, that kind of thing. They're not over-leveraged, they're massively under-leveraged. China's mortgage debt is less than 10% of GDP. Here it's 80 or 90%. You know, it's just huge. So China does have potential through just natural growth of its financial system to have more leverage to help sustain consumption. So China's a very different stage of history. It's really like the U.S. in the 19th century, before we urbanized. China's about today 40% urban, 60% rural. By 2040, that will reverse. It'll be 65 or 70% urban. And that means they have to build the equivalent of New York City every 12 months to accommodate the urbanization process. That's why they're a huge market for all these raw materials. If you're building New York City every 12 months, you need lots of steel, lots of copper, lots of other base metals. Yes?
David, how do you see if things go along like you assume they'll muddle through here? How can we benefit? What can we do to help ourselves, and our families invest and preserve our wealth and create?
Well, the challenge is always to do good research, to come to conferences like this, to meet companies and hear the story firsthand because you can meet the management, to read things that will give you good information, be it brokerage reports or investment newsletters. I travel extensively. Whenever I go to a developing country, I always visit 5 or 10 companies. I did this just 2 weeks ago when I was in the Philippines. I did it 3 weeks ago when I was in Australia. I visit lots of little companies. Through that kind of visitation, I get ideas, and I come to conferences like this. But I do believe, because of the magnitude of this correction, there are tremendous values out there. I just think things are very, very undervalued in general right now, compared to what they might, where they might be in 12 or 18 months when things are more normal and have stabilized. So I would just say I treat the crisis as a buying opportunity. The challenge for you is to do the research, to find the right sources of information to inform you so you can make good decisions.
How soon do you want to grab that falling knife, though?
Well, I've already began to buy one or two stocks this week. I bought an Indonesian food stock. It's the biggest producer of seeds in Southeast Asia. The stock has fallen from 5,000 rupiah back in June to 1,300 rupiah this week. It's on a PE of 6 with a 30% growth rate. And it's the biggest producer of seeds. And guess what Asia needs with a rising population and rising need for food? It needs seeds. They're the biggest producer of seeds for wheat and corn and rice in Southeast Asia. That's guaranteed to be a high-growth company, I think, indefinitely. So it's an example of what you can find right now in this market. And if I go around the world, I can find lots of other stories. I found a little stock in Australia last week. It's an industrial estate company here in Chicago, listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. It owns 30 industrial estates in the Chicago suburbs. The stock has an asset value of $1. It pays a dividend of 5 cents, and it fell last week to 10 cents. It's 50% dividend yield. And there's no debt maturing in the next year. It's got a reasonably good balance sheet. It's part of a big Australian real estate group. They spun this off 2 years ago. It was $1.20 a share a year ago, and now it's 10 cents, with 50% dividend yield. There's a lot of stories like this around the world if you look. So, I'm sorry I don't write an investment newsletter with stock tips, but chat with me later. Yes, over here.